upon external events to motivate our young people. Perhaps now this is an invitation to rethink how we build relationships with young people, and we allow those intimate personal relationships, even if they have to be cultivated in a digital format, to be the driving force of what we do, rather than pay to play events that we go to, we sit back, we watch, and then we unpack later on. Now, again, my bread and butter is these events, so I want them to come back at some point. But I want to use it as kind of the overarching, this is an opportunity and an invitation, I think, to structurally reorganize and revision how we have done youth ministry. All that being said, none of us have done this before. None of us have been in quarantine before. None of us have ever sat in our own homes and worked remotely by choice. We might have done that, but by force, not being able to engage or to gather or to sit down with teenagers or to put them on a bus and go to that camp that has been the anchor that we've been so reliant upon. And so moving forward, none of us are experts. None of us have all the answers, but we do know two things. We can't just be reactionary. We can't just say, okay, well, this canceled. Now I'm going to create a virtual event to fill the hole. We can't just be reactionary. We have to be forward thinking. What does this mean for my relationship with young people in the future? And we also, I think, really have to be patient, both with ourselves and with our teenagers. A lot of grace has to be given right now. My husband's a biology teacher, and he's been doing online learning since, I think it was March the 15th that they started. And he was telling me this morning, 72% of his students are failing his biology class. Now, this is an inner city school where there's a lot of other struggles within that school community. If they were in person, he'd probably still have about half of his students failing, because it's just kind of the culture of the school. And there's a lot of different challenges. But he said, if that many students are failing, it doesn't necessarily just reflect poorly on him as a teacher. And he's willing to take on some of that error and some of that hurt. But it also shows that maybe these students are really struggling in the midst of whatever's going on, whether it's just having reliable internet or having a reliable device that they can turn to, or having supportive parents who aren't making them go find a job at a grocery store, which has been a reality that his students have faced. So he's had to be very patient with his students and very patient with himself, and the administration has had to be very, very patient with what they're dealing with. And I think that's a disposition and an attitude that we cannot ignore as church right now. So those are just kind of the two. We're not experts, and we have to be really patient. But with that, we do have stats and data on Gen Z. And so every generation, and I've said this in countless presentations, every generation is defined by something. Millennials are defined by 9/11. We remember it. We remember the world before, and we remember the world after. And I was just having this conversation an hour ago with a friend of mine on the phone, how post 9/11, nobody questioned TSA. That's just what had to happen. You took your shoes off, you put your bag up on the conveyor belt, you're only allowed to have small amounts of liquid, right? Nobody questioned that. Nobody questioned now you couldn't walk right up to the front gates of the White House, but there are these barricades and cars can't drive past. Nobody questioned that. Nobody questioned metal detectors and showing IDs, and those things just became normal. And so, sure, this might not be the same thing by any means, but there is a new normal moving forward. And so how is that going to define this generation of young people whose senior years have abruptly ended and now they don't get graduation, who their study abroad semesters as sophomores in college, they had to come home early. And the anxiety surrounding that, the frustration about their coursework, the trying to get on a plane. My editor at Ave Maria Press, her son is a sophomore at Notre Dame. He had his summer semester or study abroad was in London, and he was in Spain when the announcements were made that European, Americans in Europe had to come home. And she said he is still dealing with some of that PTSD of trying to figure out how to get back to London, how to find a flight quick enough, maxing out his credit card as quickly as possible, stress that a 19, 20-year-old kid should never have to deal with. And that they're still trying to reassure him every day, like, that's never going to happen to you again. And he said, yeah, but we never expected this would have happened in January when I went. And so helping young people process these big life-changing moments, even if they seem very small or minor to us. When she told me that he was still dealing with the trauma of having to book a flight, I kind of rolled my eyes. And then she explained to me the context. He was in a hostel. He didn't really have Wi-Fi. He's in a country where he didn't speak the language, and he had to figure out how to get quickly back to London and then quickly back to the States. So if this is a generation-defining moment, what do we already know about this generation in regards to their faith? We already know that Gen Z is disaffiliating faster than any other generation. The jump between millennials and Gen Z identifying as atheists doubled in the past couple of years. So about 7 to 8% of millennials identify as non-believers, atheists. I don't believe in a higher power. I have no religious affiliation. Not just the nuns who say, well, I believe, but I don't attach myself to organized religion, but the God's not real. And if he is real, he hates me kind of thing. That number has doubled. We've got between 14 and 15% in Gen Z that's coming from Pew Research. So if we already know that there's a high number who question the existence of God, who want nothing to do with organized religion, we can also then go into that and we see some reasons why. And I'll send you guys the PDF of these slides as well as the recording of the webinar. But non-Christian Gen Zs said that there were a few things that kept them from having faith. They don't believe that a good God could allow suffering. So there's a hard time processing bad things and how, if there's a good God, why would those bad things happen? Well, we're in the middle of a pandemic where people are dying from a disease that we don't know a whole lot about, and their lives have been disrupted. Those are two pretty terrible things. And if they've lost friends or family or have been directly affected by this, in a medical sense, that's going to be an even bigger mental hurdle to jump past. There's a lot of injustices in church history. Science refutes too much of the Bible. So there's these analytical, measurable things, and here comes scripture that tells me God made the world in 7 days. And before we have a conversation with them about allegory and story and what this tells us, they just immediately write it off. Christians are hypocrites. It's not a hard thing for me to believe that young people would believe about Christians. I mean, spend 30 minutes on the internet and you find that out really quickly. And then 12% of the survey data of Gen Zs asking them, okay, why aren't you a believer? Why don't you come to church? 12% said, I used to go to church, but it's just not important to me anymore. I used to read that as, okay, well, that's a sentence that they heard from mom and dad. That's mom and dad who used to maybe have some sort of attachment to religion, some sort of attachment to faith, and then it just became a non-priority for families. And now, 8 weeks into no public masses in a lot of places, or public masses that have to happen very differently, parking lots, car side communion service, whatever it is that's happening, are we going to see that number jump? That, okay, well, it became very evident to us very quickly that this wasn't important, that this was just, our Sunday mornings were a lot more peaceful without having to rush out the door to go to mass where the music was off key and Father's homily was too long and the air conditioner didn't keep up with all the bodies in the building. Are we going to see that number jump? What we really see from this the non-believer Gen Z segment is that the church hasn't really shown them that it matters, that it's relevant to them. And we see that reflected in the data of the Christian Gen Zers who often say, I can find God elsewhere, I can teach myself about the faith, the church is out of date, rituals are meaningless and empty. So the church is distant and cold to the believing Gen Zers. So if we switch all of that, right, this is the sad data, Gen Zers who don't believe, Gen Zers who are disaffiliated, Gen Zers who don't want to come anymore. If we look at the ones who do believe, we see some encouraging stuff. And is props to all of us who work in church ministry. The regular church-going Gen Zers said that the church was a place that gave them answers to find a meaningful life. Over 80% of them said that the church was a place where if they asked a big question about big issues, human sexuality, God's allowing bad things to happen, suffering, big questions concerning, moral quandaries of the day, right? The church gave them meaningful answers. That the church had been relevant to them personally, that it was a place where they found community, where they found connection, that they can be themselves at church. We don't often hear that in relation to the church, and because normally it's the sad stories that get elevated, right? The young person who was made fun of, or the young person who was made to feel isolated, or the young person who felt like that they didn't fit in. But how many of us know that teenagers who didn't fit in at school, who couldn't find community, in different areas of their life, but they came to us, they came to our youth group, they came to church, they went to that camp, they went on the conference weekend, and they walked away with friends that they never knew that they could have. We all know those glory stories. And then that the people in church, Gen Zers who are affiliated and who are attached to church, that the people there are understanding and tolerant, that they were, it was a home to them. So we see kind of two groups. We see the non-believers either had faith and walked away for lack of answers, for lack of meaning. And then the people who stuck around found answers, found meaning, found community. All that data comes from Barna. They did a Gen Z study last year. It's about 150 pages of just raw data and insights. You can find it on the Barna website. They're actually running a huge sale right now. You get 5 downloads per copy. So, pair up with your partners and buy a copy and read it. And it's fascinating stuff. And they actually just said the other day that they're going to redo some of that research post-pandemic to see how those numbers have been affected. So that'll be really, really interesting to see. While all of this started and was going on, the Springtide Research Institute launched this, Belonging. And this research specifically looks at the loneliest generation, which is fascinating considering that Gen Z has never not had the internet. So you'd think they'd be the most connected generation. But that led them to some pretty stark statistics. They found that young people's experience of loneliness, and so they surveyed about 1,000 young people across the country from the ages of 13 to 25. So pretty wide demographic, both socioeconomically, racially, and all within a Christian church context. This is what they said. 36% of young people surveyed said, I have nobody to talk to. 30% said, I feel completely alone. 43%, I feel as if no one understands me. 33%, no one really knows me well. And 38%, it's difficult for me to make friends. Now, that's a lot of numbers and stats being thrown. But here's what I think we can extrapolate from the data. We know that young people who don't have faith or who have left their faith, have disaffiliated, have done so because they don't feel like they belong. They don't feel like that place has given them answers. And this data even shows us that young people who do have faith and do believe feel very isolated sometimes within their own communities, as if there's not people there that love them and that know them. Springtide did a quick poll when all of this got started. They just surveyed 500 18 to 25-year-olds. So a little higher than some of our demographic, but I think still applicable data of, okay, how have you felt during quarantine? Have you felt alone? Have you felt isolated? Have you felt like people have checked in? Only 25% said that people had checked in with them. 25% said that no person had really checked in with them, like no trusted adult, no mentor. So the 75% that did have somebody check in, they said, okay, well, who was that? And they said, family, a close friend. It was only 1% that said somebody from church, whether it was a pastor, a youth minister, a young adult minister. Only 1% said that somebody from their church community had connected with them in a personal way. They weren't talking like a Flocknote mass email. They weren't talking an Instagram post, like an actual pick up the phone. Are you okay? How are you doing? How can I help? What do you need? I'm not saying that that's on you to do, but if you put all this together, we see young people that aren't connected for lack of meaning and answers and community. We see young people who do feel like they have community when they are connected, but we also see these young people that are really, really lonely. Is this moment of pandemic and quarantine, sorry, let me turn off the notifications. If this moment of pandemic and quarantine is continuing to isolate and is continuing to disconnect us and is not giving us opportunities to gather in the same way that we always have and in the ways that we're comfortable and familiar, one of two things can happen. Those numbers are just going to rise and feeling lonely and isolated and nobody's there for me. Or we can use this as a moment to make time every day to talk to a different young person, to reach out to the people in our parish communities in a more personal and intentional way. Somebody made a joke the other day. You can't say no to a Zoom call these days because everybody knows you're just home. Like they know you're not doing anything. It's like, well, I'm still doing things. Like I still have to write and I still have to work, still have to cook meals, but in some sense, that person's kind of right. We are finding ourselves with some more uninterrupted time that we can potentially use, and I think should be using, to intentionally engage with young people who may have kind of fallen off of our radar, who may be falling by the wayside, who may have been having some really big questions that we were just getting into, and then we just had to kind of stop everything because the opportunities for continued gathering and engagement are gone. I highly recommend you can get a digital download of this or the hard copy from Springtide Belonging, because there's a lot in there that I think is applicable to what's going on pre and post pandemic anyway. Perhaps it's more important now than ever before. I think overall, and I'm wrapping up, I promise, the three things that young people really care the most about, and what we see reflected in Christus Vivit, what we see reflected in the data from Barna and Springtide, is that young people want something to believe in. They want answers. They don't always like the answers, but I've always found that when a young person asks a question, if I'm willing to engage with them in serious conversation and dialogue, and not just say, well, this is what we believe, and shrug my shoulders and say that's just the way it is, but actually engage with an opportunity to learn, that they're more likely to check in and perhaps even begin to ascribe to that belief. They're looking for community. We see this especially in the summertime when young people are given opportunities to really focus on intentional small group opportunities and work camps and at events or at summer camp, whatever it might be. or even just the regular gatherings that your youth ministry is doing because they're not as stressed with the things that school is requiring them to do. They're looking for opportunities to find not just like-minded people, but to find people that they can talk to, that they can laugh with, that they can be themselves with. And young people are looking for mission and purpose. They're looking for the opportunity to give back. This is why Catholic Heart work camps and diocesan service projects are always sold out as quickly as they are, because young people want to do hard work. They want to give back in some way. I also think in an interesting way, sorry, my dog has lost his mind. There's this weird, and I haven't fully fleshed my thoughts out, so you're kind of going to get my train of thought here, but we're seeing this massive increase in content creation online, not just from professionals who do this for a living, but from teenagers and from young adults who are posting Instagram mini blogs and who are starting YouTube channels and who are creating these podcasts because they're looking for an outlet to share and to talk and to have conversation. And so they're looking for a way to say something meaningful, and social media gives them that opportunity. Sometimes it's misguided because they're just looking for high follower counts, or maybe looking to make a quick buck on some sort of sponsored posts, and that's not always, but it's not always good. But oftentimes their heart is in the right place and wanting to engage with a message. I don't quite know where that's coming from, and if I'm just paying more attention because I'm on my phone more. But I have noticed in the past couple of years there has been this desire and this drive to share faith in a digital platform that's being driven by Gen Z. What's that going to look like as this continues and we're on our phones? So all of that to say, I think there's 5 things that we have to do right now in quarantine as people in ministry in order to fight the disaffiliation, to keep them connected to their parish communities, to help them feel less lonely, which we already knew was a problem with people who were and who were not active believers. We have to reach out. Intentional, personal reaching out, whether that's a phone call, a text message, a card in the mail, not just a Zoom call with all 45 young people who are engaged in your confirmation class. Those are valuable, but you can get lost in a Zoom call and you can stop paying attention on a Zoom call. And if I'm not leading the Zoom call, about 30 minutes in, I'm clicking around on my computer. So what are some ways that we can intentionally, personally reach out to young people and have those conversations? Have those, how you doing? And even if they just say, fine, even if they don't really want to talk, they know that we took the time to reach out. We have to figure out a way to do and to replicate community in a digital format. And I think that can only really be done with intentional small groupings and gatherings. So 8 to 10 young people max on a group FaceTime, on a Zoom call, on a Google Hangout, and have opportunities for pointed conversations. So, hey, we're all going to read the Sunday Gospel and we're going to get together and we're going to talk about it. And the 8 to 10 young people that sign up for group A meet with you, and the 8 to 10 young people who sign up for group B, they meet with one of your core team members or with Father or whatever it is, finding ways to gather in smaller intentional groups where voices can be heard, where young people feel like they're not just in a sea of people. Think about, I think back to my youth house where our teenagers would gather. And the first hour of any Bible study that we did was food and just hanging out. And they would naturally form their own little groups of friends and people. Half the group would be outside playing volleyball, and another half of the group would be sitting around the pool table, and some of the kids would just be sitting on the floor, watching Snapchats and laughing. Today it would be TikTok, whatever it is, but they already naturally form small groups within their larger gatherings. So figure out a way to do that in a digital environment where they don't feel overwhelmed by every single voice that's sharing at the same time. Content is being created at a pace, the likes of which the church has never seen before. I was emailing Jason Everett this morning about this youth chastity conference that's happening at the end of May, and all these videos that they want to create and produce. And I'm excited to participate, and I think it's going to be awesome. And hey, if there's a chance to make a little bit of money because there's an affiliate link, then I'm all about it. But in the back of my head, every time I see a new virtual conference or another, event that's happening where you can tune in and watch a speaker, the back of my head thinks, if I was a 17-year-old kid right now, the only person I'd want to be hearing from is my own pastor and my own youth minister, right? There's all this stuff that's happening and being created, but you are far more powerful and your voice is far more valuable to them. I'm not saying that you have to set up a camera and record a 45-minute talk every Sunday. Maybe go through some of this content that already has been created and find the best that your young people would react to and would respond to, and have opportunities to share that with them and then engage in dialogue post watching the content. we're falling into screen fatigue very, very quickly. I did one of these calls with the Denver youth ministers a few weeks ago. And I jokingly said, we're all tired of screens. Well, now here we are 4 weeks later, and we're done with them, right? Like, I'm ready to throw my computer in the trash and never look at a cell phone again. I can only imagine teens who are engaging with online learning, who are also being inundated with every link and click and opportunity to watch this, that, or the other. So take the burden upon yourself to find the best and share it with them, and then figure out ways to have conversations with them about it, to where they're not just passively watching. I know I've got a group of young people. So I taught freshman theology for 5 years. My last class are seniors now. And about, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 of them, I'm still really close to. A couple of them are babysitters for my daughter, so I see them on a regular basis. So a few weeks ago, Grace texted me, graduation's been canceled. They're all pretty bummed about it, right? The rescheduled date is August, but as some of them have already shared with me, most of them are moving to LSU the weekend that rescheduled graduation has been put. And they they're a little heartbroken that they're literally going to graduate and then have to get in a car and drive away from town. And that closure. So she was just like, can we hang out? And it's like, well, no, you can't come to my house. I guess we could maybe get in the back of our cars and do a tailgate style gathering in the parking lot where we're all 6 feet away. But we've been doing weekly FaceTime calls. So you can group FaceTime. So we all have iPhones. So we group FaceTime on our computers. And what I've been doing is sending them the link to Father Mike Schmitz's homily from the Sunday. They all watch it, and we just talk about it, right? Father Mike videos were something I used in class 5 years ago with them, a few years ago when they were freshmen, I guess 4 years ago. So it's something that was already kind of common to us. I watch it ahead of time and come up with a couple questions for them to then get to reflect upon with each other. And then I usually bug out about 30 minutes into the call because I'm a mom and I have to cook dinner, and there's a 2-year-old that doesn't want me staring at my screen all the time. And they continue chatting, they continue talking. So find ways to curate the content and lead to intentional dialogue. Follow-up is really important. A young person's going to see right through you if you texted them one time and said, hey, how you doing? And you never text them again. If you call them one time or invite them to one thing, but never actually check back in. They can tell if you're just checking off their name on a list or if you actually are making the investment of time. This is where your volunteers, this is where core team members, this is where parents really come in handy. Because if you are from a larger parish, or if you have a number of young people that you are responsible for and whose spiritual welfare is your job, you cannot be expected emotionally, mentally, or time-wise to take it all upon yourself. So maybe find some of those trusted adults that you know, that you love, that you depend upon to also help you with some of this work in continuing to engage. Lastly, I found, and maybe this is true for you too, that it's usually when folks have gone above and beyond in little ways. So I'm not saying the birthday parade where 500 cars drive by one person's house. Those are really cool. Those are great. I'm not asking you to do that for every teenager that you know. But small, simple gestures of compassion and love have gone far further in all of this than I think they ever would before. So week 2, week 3 of quarantine, I got a text message from a friend of mine. She's actually a mega church pastor here in Lake Charles. I taught her daughter as a freshman. Her daughter's now in college. Her other daughter has babysat for us a few times. We're good buddies. We talk all the time, Miss Hope. And 2-3 weeks before this all got started, I bumped into her at a bakery one day. Rose and I always go to this bakery, my 2-year-old, after school on Thursdays. Thursdays is her Friday. So we always go, we get chocolate chip cookies and we have chocolate milk at this bakery. And we bumped into her and she was there with a friend of hers and she picked up the tab for us. She got up from her table where she was sitting with a friend. She came over, she bought our cookies and milk. And she said, just a little Thursday pick me up, right? Just this really sweet gesture. Well, the next week we were in quarantine, right? So we weren't at the bakery. And then week 2 and week 3, and I jokingly posted on my Twitter, which I didn't even realize she followed me on Twitter, how the saddest thing was watching my daughter start to realize that there was this disruption to our routine, and that even a 2.5-year-old was noticing the normal things that we would do, go to the park, go pick up cookies and milk, right? Even just driving to school in the mornings and listening to this one stupid Jonas Brothers song. She was noticing these things were missing, and it was making me really sad. So I get this text message from Hope. Hey, I'm going to drop something off on Saturday in your driveway. Just be outside to wave. She came over to our house. She'd gone to the bakery. They're doing curbside service, had picked up cookies, had picked up milk, had gotten us these cute little tea towels and just gave it to us. It's hey, I'm thinking about you. I know that sometimes this can be really rough and I love you. It probably cost her $15 and 20 minutes of time. And that that gesture of I'm thinking about you and I care about you, and like I'm looking at the card, you were doing a freaking great job, up on the sign, and like I hung up the little postcard that she gave me because it was such an encouragement to me as a mom, as somebody who works in ministry. What are some small gestures of love and compassion that you can give to your teenagers who maybe feel a little unseen and forgotten, who are watching their parents be super stressed? You know, up to this point, to kind of loop back to what I said at the beginning, sociologists thought that Gen Z would be defined by the housing and financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and that the election of 2016 and the vitriol in our country, this is not a political statement, but just the way that conversation began to happen, was going to be what defined this generation. Well, that is no longer true. It's going to be a pandemic of 2020. And whatever age that Gen Z is right now, whether the oldest Gen Zers who are 23 or the youngest Gen Zers who are like 8 years old, this is going to be the thing that they reference well into adulthood. This is going to be the moment that everything in their head shifted to before my school year ended in March and after my school year ended in March. And I had the longest summer of my life, or, you know, had to go back to school and we had to eat lunch in the cafeteria and we couldn't go out on the playground, and we had to, I mean, they're talking in Louisiana about half the alphabet goes Monday, Tuesday, half the alphabet goes Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday is a home learning day, right? That's a fundamental shift in the way our culture operates. This is going to be a defining moment. Maybe the thing that they can remember in this defining moment is their youth minister sending them a card, or their youth minister dropping off. Somebody told me last week they've been, every Friday, they've been picking a different teenager and dropping off their favorite Sonic drink. They have a very small youth group. And so they just text the kid, they say, hey, what's your favorite Sonic drink? They bring it and they drop it off during happy hour. Maybe it's my favorite app has been Ink Cards. It's $2 to send a pretty neat little postcard, postage is included. You send it straight from your phone. You probably have your teenagers' families' addresses, right? Send them some Pentecost cards. Get together, you can buy a pack of like credits on Ink Cards for like $25. You can send 15, 20 cards, so you get a discount. And just a little piece of happy mail could go above and beyond to show them you're thinking of them. So those 5 things: reaching out, figuring out gatherings, curating content, following up in a consistent way, and showing compassion and love in an above and beyond way. I think that's really the only way we're going to survive any of this. And who knows, maybe tomorrow the CDC comes out and says we were completely wrong, this is not as big of a deal. Or maybe it's August before any of us are fully back at full operational capacity, or next spring. The phone call I was on this morning was with some folks from Steubenville talking about the canceled summer events and, you know, digital content that we're going to try to create to stay connected to people. And a very wise Franciscan priest, who I think many of us love, on the call, Father Dave Pavanka, said, we need to stop thinking about how to fix it and just try to pay attention to what God's trying to do through it. And I don't think more truer words have been spoken to me in the midst of all this. We can't fix it. We cannot end it. There's no magic bullet to try to solve the problem, but we can pay attention to what God is doing during it and in us and through it. So with that, sorry, I kind of rambled. I'm Cajun, so I tend to not shut up. Everett didn't tell me to stop though, so I just kept going. I'm going to drop into the chat the PDF of my slides. Just ignore the is there a way to like add things? I used to be able to like add. I'll just email it to him. I thought I could drop a document in here, but
yeah, if you email it to me, Katie, I can.
Yeah, I'll email it to you, and it's got all my statistics. They're not mine. From Spring Tide in Barna.
Katie, do you have time to stay on with us for some Q&A?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I've gotten to about 11 my time.
Awesome. Well, we first off, we really appreciate you jumping on with us, and I apologize to everyone too for my technical difficulties in the beginning of this, but I think I got it figured out. I'm going to unmute everybody. I muted everybody during Katie's sharing with us. I'm going to unmute everybody, and if that gets too chaotic with background noise and stuff, I'll mute everybody, and we're going to go to raising your hand. But in the midst of this, Katie's on with us for another 20 minutes or so, so I'd love to give you the opportunity to pick her brain on anything she's talking about or anything else in between. So I'm going to unmute, and then first person to talk gets to ask a question. Unmute all. You should all be unmuted at this point. You do have the power to mute yourself if you. So does somebody have a question for Katie?
I'd just like to make a comment. Katie, hi, I'm Kathy Lowe. I'm the Director of Marriage, Family Life, Faith Formation, and Youth Ministry for the Diocese of Palm Beach. And I just appreciate your time and your wisdom. And, just your comment that the new definition really for Gen Z being, the pandemic of 2020. And here's an opportunity to stand out by some very, very simple thing of reaching out in a very personal way to the family, to anybody, to families, to the teens, whatever. And I just think that's just an awesome idea. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for listening.
Actually, on that point, I'm going to throw out there, if you've got like 50 students in your confirmation class and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do something personal for all 50? Don't think about that. Start with the mindset. Focus, who is one of the best, most successful college campus ministry organization that I'm aware of. They have a philosophy that they teach their missionaries, which is just get two. And in that they said, just focus on two. Like, you can focus in on two, because if you focus in on the two and those two make two disciples and those two make two disciples. So, I mean, if you're thinking in terms of like, how am I going to do personal reach out? Think about, okay, how can I do personal reach out to two of my teenagers this week? And maybe next week it's another two, and maybe next week it's another two. But make it simple for yourself. I'm a big fan of the idea of that. If you set a goal for yourself and that goal seems daunting, the bar is probably too high. Set your goals low so that it seems like it's simple to accomplish, because in all likelihood you'll accomplish it if it's simple.
Absolutely.
Get bigger over time.
Yeah. You got to start somewhere. So other questions? Kathy, thanks for your comment. Don't be shy.
And it's okay if you don't, but I'm sitting here, so you're welcome to. Has anybody found or done anything that they've been particularly proud of with their ministry thus far? Want to brag a little bit, give somebody the idea?
Oh, it's a quiet group. A lot of you are muted, so you seem to have muted yourselves. So if you talk, you need to unmute.
I'll say something. So my name is Diana, and I am a youth minister in Stuart, Florida at St. Joseph Catholic Church. And I actually started, some of you might know this already, but I started probably a month before the pandemic. I started as a youth minister. So it's been kind of strange because I don't have a pre-established relationship with all the teens and families. So I've been trying to figure out what to do. How can I be of use as a youth minister right now? How can I represent the church? So my biggest thing was just, I know that there's Project YM and there's Life Teen, and I'm like, I can easily just like drop that link for them there, but I want them to feel like I'm making an effort for them, right? Like I'm new here, and I want them to know that I'm here for them somehow. So I started a Facebook Live with a Facebook group of some of the parents that had been involved before. And it's been really strange because it's just me like going on the live, and then I invited one of the core members to be present in the music ministry. And just because I don't have a lot of volunteers, I don't have anything right now really. But I decided to gear it more towards the family, mostly because I'm just one person right now, and I haven't really started the ministry. And also because I think it's really important to acknowledge that the teens have their families right now. That's something that I've really been kind of encountering in my prayer, is that right now they're stuck at home with their families, and that's their reality. And I think it's a really good opportunity to empower the parents to be more involved in their teens' prayer lives. So I'm calling it like a family prayer night. And I'm kind of talking about topics and involving the parents. Like, I'm not the one leading the small groups. I empower the parents to do that. And I'm not the one leading the games. Like, I tell the parents to do it with their families. So that's something that I've been doing, just because I mean, I don't know, Katie, if you have any suggestions of what I can do to be more intentional with them, since I don't have that relationship with them. That's just something that I've I'm trying to figure out what else to do because
yeah. Well, God love you for getting started a month before. I mean, that's baptism by fire in the parish community. But you said Facebook Live. I was going to say doing some sort of like pointed video content on social media for your parish, whether that's on Instagram Live, where you maybe invite a family to go live with you, and you even just like an interview style, like ask them how you've been doing, what have you been doing as a family during quarantine. It takes the pressure off of you to have to create all the content, but it does give you an opportunity to connect with a family that other people might tune in to watch because they know that family, but then you also become familiar to the community. But you seem to be doing that with the Facebook Lives, which is awesome. The other thing I was going to say is, even if it's low tech, to put yourself in front of a camera and record just a couple short talks, whether it's just a simple gospel reflection on the Sunday gospel, a quick like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I love, this is some of the stuff I've been doing to stay sane in the midst of all of this. To just give yourself a chance to be in front of them, to where when we all do come back, they don't think, who's that girl over there who keeps smiling at me, because you sent them a card in the mail, but they have no idea who it was from. I think taking advantage of the digital components that we have available to us right now would be really, really valuable. But God love you. I'll be praying for you by name because it's hard to build a ministry when you can't do the donut social. You can't take the kids to the conference that you'd all get to know each other that 3 days. But it sounds like you're doing really good with the families, which I think is awesome.
God will, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Katie, here and please, if somebody has a question, interrupt me, because I have an opportunity to talk to about youth ministry all the time. But I'd love to. I mean, you shared a lot of stats, a lot of stuff about Gen Z, really helpful stuff. A lot of it's scary when we think about the disaffiliation and the fact that we're losing young people. You had an opportunity in going to the Vatican and being part of the process with the Youth Synod to get kind of a global perspective about youth in the church and what they're looking for. Can you tell us something encouraging with regards to that experience?
Yeah. So I actually, the numbers are scary when you look just at the bad, because that's often what we pay attention to, right? But I deeply believe in the same philosophy that invented Instagram. We shouldn't ask just why people aren't coming. We should pay attention to the people who are there and ask them why they like it, and then do that better. I mean, that's how Instagram came about. It was an app that was designed initially as like a check-in app. It was like Yelp. And you'd go on and you'd rate coffee houses and bars and concert venues, and it wasn't growing. But the feature that people seemed to like was the photo sharing. And so they decided to just redesign the whole app to just make it photo sharing. And now there's over 100 million people who use it, every day. 94 million photos on average are posted daily. I imagine that number's nearly doubled during quarantine. So they flipped the question. And so I think that's perfect, Everett. If we flip the question, I saw two things happening globally that seem to have been like spin-offs of stuff that happens in America, because we really are the leaders in youth and young adult ministry. Somebody in my small group at the Pre-Synod is from Ghana, and he said, "Oh, I love your USCCB website." And I laughed, like I snort laughed in his face when he said that, because I was like, it's like the most terrible website in America. And he said, "Oh, it's better than ours." And if you go to the Ghanan Bishop Conference, there's not a whole lot there. So like, I never realized the embarrassment of riches that we have as a country. I spoke to a guy in Egypt who, he saw my like personal website link at the bottom of an email, clicked on it. That somehow got him to the Steubenville Conference website. He spent an entire day of our Pre-Synod gathering just watching speakers' YouTube videos. He had no idea that existed. So we have been a model. There were two things globally from two completely different parts of the world that I thought were really fascinating. So in England, there's this huge missionary component to Catholicism in England, because English Catholicism was basically stolen from them. So like, you walk into any church in England that's not Catholic anymore, but it probably was Catholic, and the walls have been stripped and there's no tabernacle, and you just kind of feel like something's been stolen. But there's this huge, beautiful movement of street ministry, which is something that was very popular in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Frank Sheed was a person who would do this, where they literally will put on ugly, bright yellow hoodies and go into city centers and strike up conversations with people. And the beautiful thing about the Brits are that they're not rude people. So they'll listen to you, whether they want to or not. They will not shut you up. Same thing with Canadians, right? Canadians will never know how to end a conversation and will stay there and talk to you forever. So like the Brits have this beautiful missionary attitude of, I come up with I know my testimony, I know my story, I know how to share it with people. I was in Newcastle, England in November, and they were telling me, like, the day that before my event, they had gone and done this. And the guy that was driving me around, his name was Pip, was saying how hard it was at the beginning of the day, but by the end of the day, he couldn't wait to find somebody that looked like they'd be ready and willing to listen. And so they've got this really cool culture of these missionaries, young people, young adults who gather together, who practice their stories, their testimonies, and then go share them. The other thing, and I learned this when I was at the pre-synod in March of 2018, so 2 years ago now, this guy, Charles from Ghana, was telling me that the church is alive in Africa, not just because the liturgies are beautiful or because there's a vibrancy and a desire or because vocations are booming, but because the church has made themselves indispensable in helping young adults find jobs. So he worked in the banking industry. And he said he found that job because the priest had a connection who got him an interview. And that he will forever be committed to the Catholic Church and his love of the faith because this priest helped him find a job. And on the one hand, it's like, okay, well, that's kind of utilitarian. Like, the church shouldn't backdoor their way into people's lives. But then if you also think about the economic challenges in Ghana, that was an indispensable thing for him to be able to find a job to where he can pay his bills and save money and make a better life for himself. And so that showed to me that sometimes in our country, we very much isolate, like, well, the church is doing their thing, and in your life, you do your thing. But what are some ways that maybe the church can pay more attention to the whole person's both formation and livelihood? I think back to, so 3 years ago today, actually, my husband lost his job. His contract wasn't renewed at the parish or at the school that he taught at. And then 2 days later, they didn't renew my contract. And I was 6 months pregnant, and we just bought a house. And it sucked. I mean, it was the worst thing that's ever happened to us. And it hurt like hell. And we felt abandoned and betrayed. And the first 2 phone calls that I got from priests that I'm close to, the first phone call was, come to my office. I want to talk through this with you. I want to help you. And he gave us some great spiritual advice. And then he paid our mortgage for the next 2 months out of his own pocket. And I will never forget the kindness of that priest who knew we were looking down the barrel of, we don't have an income past July when these contracts expire. And he took it upon himself to pay our mortgage for those 2 months. I'm not saying that your parish pastor needs to pay the mortgage, but it was a moment where he entered into the crud of our lives and didn't just say, like, oh, I'm going to pray for you, but like actually took care of us. The other priest that was very, very indispensable to us, and it was kind of one of those things where I didn't think it would matter as much as it did, but he called us into his office, and I've known this priest since I was a child. He heard my first confession when I was in 2nd grade. And he gave us these gift cards, and he said, you have a reservation at this hotel in Galveston, Houston. Enjoy your baby moon. And he sent us on a vacation because he said, you need to get out of town. The baby needs to hear laughter. The 2 of you just need to reconnect and not be thinking about this all the time. And they took care of us. And I think back to when Charles told me about this priest helping him find a job, ways that the church cares about the human person in their struggle and in their hurt, or even in their most basic need, and not just the, I'll pray a rosary for you, I'll think of you when I go to mass on Sunday. Those 2 things really give me hope, to see that there's this missionary component in England that I don't think we have in the States because it's kind of easy for us sometimes, and this desire to really help, especially young adults in Africa who are looking for financial and economic stability. And the church provides job training. The church provides opportunities to connect with companies that are looking for people to hire. The church is often a forum for that.
I love what you said in one of the things I always tell people when I'm doing training in ministry in general is just that youth ministry, or just ministry in general, by definition, is meeting the needs of a person. So why does the church do homeless ministry? Well, the purpose of our great commission from Christ is to go make disciples of all nations. And yes, it is for the dignity of the person, like every person deserves food. That's why we go and serve people. But there's also the practical nature of it, that we can't share the gospel with somebody if their basic needs aren't being met. And so the first step of any ministry needs to be, who am I responsible to serve, and what are their needs? because why do we do homeless ministry? Because it would be honestly just cold and uncharitable to go to somebody who's starving on the street and say, let me share with you something from the Bible.
Right.
Let's be like, no, let
Right.
me give you bread first.
Yeah, let me
Because
go
that's
buy you
what's
a meal.
yeah, right. And then the door becomes open.
Mhm.
I professor of mine in college, Dr. Scott Hahn, always used to say that you got to win the right to be heard. The best
Mhm.
evangelization tools for anybody is pizza and beer.
Yeah.
And you'd think, like, with Scott Hahn, he'd be talking about covenant theology or Bible or whatever, but no,
He will. He'll get to
he
that.
will.
Yeah.
Yeah, he will get to that. Beat you over the head with covenant.
Yeah, he'll
But
never stop talking about that.
right, but there's a reality to it. He's like, no, it's pizza and beer. You got to win the right to be heard first.
Yeah,
And
there's a parish in our town that has been there's a couple of local restaurants that are doing like family packs where you can order like a large tray of pasta or like 5 hamburgers from Texas Roadhouse. And so there's a parish in town, a pretty well-off parish, that has a sign up where families can sign up to get one of these meals. And I love that the first thought of this parish wasn't how can we just get people to parking lot mass, but was how can we feed some families who, even just one meal a week can help alleviate the grocery bill, which we all know it's doubled in my house because we're eating every meal here. I feel like all I've done is go to Walmart pickup for the past 55 days. But it was like this very simple gesture of, we're going to buy 5 pastas from this place. We're going to get 10 pizzas from this place, and 10 families a week can sign up and come pick up this food from us. And, they get to see Father's face and they get this meal. It's an above and beyond service of the needs of these folks. And I'm sure you're all doing this. I want to affirm the heck out of you for taking the time not only to hop on a call, but to even think about ways to be creative with our teens at this particular moment. And whether this ends tomorrow or it takes a few more months, that again, the memory that you make in their mind right now could really influence the rest of their life. If we think about big moments that we remember, I remember my first Bible study post 9/11. I remember the first time our youth group got back together after Hurricane Rita in 2005 when I was in high school. I remember how those priests treated Tommy and I when we lost our jobs. They're going to remember how the church treated them and how the church loved them. And it might just be a Sonic drink, but they're never going to forget that.
Amen. I'm looking at our time and realizing we're at the end. And
yeah,
if you had a question that didn't get answered, email it to me, and I'm happy to email it to Katie. And if Katie doesn't have time to answer, I'll go straight for her. So there is.
You know how to find me.
Yeah, Katie, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys.
Yeah, you were so gracious to join us.
Yeah, of course.
When you were saying, what we know, like, you can't say no to a Zoom call right now because we know you're at home. I'm like, that's how I got Katie to agree to this call.
Yeah, no, you knew it. I mean, technically I have
know
another
you're
one
at
starting
home
in 10 minutes. So, but yeah, I'm not going to. I have a Target pick up and Chick-fil-A that I got to pick up today. But other than that, I'm free. So,
well, by all means, if you need to hop off this call, that's fine. I'm just going to plug the stuff coming up next week. So thank you,
so
Katie.
much, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Real quick, before everybody else jumps off this call, I put in the chat box of this a link to the Vatican document from the Youth Synod that came out. So if you weren't familiar with the process, Katie was involved with, they gathered young people from like every country around the world. And those people came together for a gathering, and they collaborated to basically draft a document that they gave to the Vatican and the bishops of what young people want the bishops and the church to know about them. And that became kind of a sounding board then for the church to draft a document coming out of the Youth Synod, where they were discussing the needs of young people, not just in the church today, but in the world today. And from that came the document Christus Vivit, which means Christ is alive, that came out from the Vatican, written by Pope Francis. And it is honestly a brilliant document. So if you haven't had an opportunity to read it, I think Pope Francis nails it on the head in terms of what our young people need in the church today and what youth ministry should look like. And then it's up to us to take that and translate it into our respective countries and cultures and ministries. But I put a link to that document. You can Google it. It's Christus Vivit. If you haven't had a chance to read it, grab the document. Next week, we'll be doing this again on Tuesday at 11. And our speaker is Jason Everett. So Katie made mention of the fact that he has a conference that they just announced today that she'll be speaking at. I'm actually speaking at it as well, that it's a free chastity conference. So Jason is in promotional mode. So I was like, Jason, hop on with us. So Jason is going to come on. In particular, we're going to talk about ministering to kids who have LGBTQ issues and different things of that nature, but we're going to open it up to all things chastity for Q&A. So please join us for that call, and we are excited to have Jason with us next week. If you need anything in this time, please email me and let me know, even if it's just prayer intentions, and I'm happy to do my best to meet your needs in this time.
Okay. Thanks, Everett.
Thank you. Kathy, am I missing anything?
Thank you, Everett.
Kathy, I love the cross that's coming out of your head in the background.
Yeah.
It's like you're growing holiness.
To climb the mountain today. I'm climbing the mountain.
Although there's somebody in the picture behind you that's like mooning you in the background.
I know. So. I know. I've been trying to hide their butt, but it doesn't work entirely. But anyway, I thought a little levity would be good.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's a good picture.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right. Until next week, thank you all for joining us on the call.
Okay, thank you so much, Everett.
Thank you.
God bless.
God bless.
It was great. God bless you.